preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Hello, good evening, and welcome once again to our series, Roger Rosenblatt and Friends, Conversations at the Turn of the Century. My name is Susan Engel, and I direct the Adult Division in the Charles Simon Center for Adult Life and Learning, and I'm so glad to see so many of you with us for this very special program. After tonight, we have 2 more evenings in this Stella series where we reflect on this past century in an informal way among friends. On April 9th, we will be focusing on literature with Russell Banks, Rita Dove, and George Plimpton. And we conclude on May 3rd with a discussion of social progress with William F. Buckley, Katie Couric, Barney Frank, and Henry Louis Gates, Jr. So I look forward to seeing you at these programs as well. And now for tonight, it's once again my privilege to introduce the man who makes it happen, our moderator and host for this series. The winner of 2 George Polk Awards, an Emmy, a George Foster Peabody Award, the Robert F. Kennedy Book Prize, the acclaimed essayist for Time magazine and the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer on PBS, and the best friend the Y ever had, Roger Rosenblatt.
This is a story about a minister, a priest, and a rabbi. You may wonder why these 3 only get together in jokes. Minister, priest, and rabbi are playing golf, and ahead of them on the golf course is a foursome taking an interminable time at each hole, half hour, 45 minutes, an hour. Finally, the 3 clergymen are frustrated, furious. They go back to the golf club, complain to the president. Those guys ahead of us are taking too long on each hole. Can't we play around them, or can't you get them off the course? Golf club president looks at the 3 clergymen and says, "You know, I'm really ashamed of the 3 of you. Those 4 men are blind." Minister feels awful and says, I feel terrible. I'm sorry. My sermon next Sunday is going to be on the necessity of sympathetic observation. And the priest says, me too. I feel awful too. My sermon next Sunday is going to be on the necessity of compassion. And the rabbi says, why can't they play at night? Now, there is a soupçon of anti-Semitism in the joke, of course. I've always liked it because the rabbi is rational. You've experienced the only laugh you're going to have tonight, and I thought I'd get it out of the ways. The subject of humor is so humorless that I warn you of something that you know already. Certainly, my friends on the panel, there's going to be a terrible evening tonight. It is going to be a disaster, particularly compared to the other evenings we had. We had Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward and Sid Lumet talking about the movies, and Susan told you about the other events coming up, and Mario Cuomo on politics, and Ed Koch and others talking, Pete Hamill talking about the city, and Jane Pauley talking about the news and so forth. And tonight we're talking about this thoroughly humorless subject that, when it's discussed in earnest, drives people to suicide. I myself am not funny. I'm not allowed to be funny because of my contract with the NewsHour, but I'm not funny anyway. The panelists, however, are wonderfully, uproariously funny and quick-witted and wonderful people. They are likely, by the way, to make fun of me, feel no obligation to laugh at them when they do that. I'm going to go back and get them now in a very awkward move while they remove this podium, and then the 4 of us are going to come out for the benefit of the television cameras. Thank you, and thank you for coming. Say what?
Okay.
Here we go.
And Hugo, here they come.
There we are.
And here we are again.
Yeah.
There we go. Ellen Goodman, Al Franken, Jules Feiffer. Ellen, you know, is the wonderful longtime columnist on the Boston Globe, also associate editor of the Boston Globe, whose columns have graced that paper, and over 440 other papers, syndicated columnist in the country for a very long time. Always full of humor, always full of good sense. She has won, besides the Pulitzer Prize, she has won every major award that one can win in this trade.
440 papers?
440 papers. Now we've made Jules
Now you've
unhappy.
made Jules depressed.
Yes, well, 440 papers, which is stunning. The last column, it may not be the last that she wrote, but the last that I read of Ellen's was on the subject of something called Friday's bra. And Ellen was talking about a bra that you were wearing when you wrote the column. Is that correct?
Oh, yes.
Right. Well, thank God it's
Truth
Thursday.
in advertising.
Right. The kind of outfit that people are now condemned to on Fridays in anticipation of the weekend, informal clothing. It was characteristically wonderful, and it is wonderful to have Ellen Goodman. Al Franken has won 5 Emmys as a writer and producer on Saturday Night Live. He has starred in movies, written movies, created this new age nonsense Stuart Smalley. He is responsible for proving that Rush Limbaugh is a big fat idiot. And on the Comedy Channel, doing brilliant political satire. He also got in bed with Arianna Huffington, so he's had a varied life. I met Al when he was 18, and when he was an undergraduate at Harvard, and I was teaching at Harvard, and it was part of another job I had to speak to undergraduates, ask what they, yes, I hated that part of the job, ask what they plan to do with their lives.
Most Harvard professors don't actually speak to undergraduates.
And I was sorry for this lapse too. Asked Al what he wanted to do with his life, and Al said, I want to be a comedian. Now, this was not the normal thing that an undergraduate said. And of course, by saying that he wanted to be a comedian, he threw himself immediately in accidental competition with most Harvard undergraduates.
And professors.
He is smart enough, he is good enough. And he's good enough and he's smart enough. And gosh darn it, people like him, Al Franken. I don't really know what to make of Jules Feiffer. This evening is called Roger Rosenblatt and Friends, and it's just wishful thinking. I don't have any friends, but but Jules comes close.
No, I don't.
I'm acquainted with Jules. Jules comes close, and so we've been friends for a long time, and it is a privilege to be friends with so monumentally talented a man. He has won the Pulitzer too. He has won an Oscar. He talks with his hands, and he has written wonderful plays, wonderful movies. Just recently, brilliant children's books, and of course, you know him as the, in a way, the pillar of the Village Voice, and now on the New York Times, this great cartoonist who sets the country right and brings it just to the edge of dying from laughter. Another friend of Jules, the great writer Michael Arlen, and I sometimes protect Jules. He is forgetful, And sometimes he'll head for the edge of a roof or walk into the sea. So if you find him walking towards the stage, you just let me know, and we'll bring him back. His totem, his emblem in life, is Fred Astaire, for pure grace and beauty, and the fact that Astaire danced on air. So does Mr. Feiffer, Jules Feiffer. Just ask all three of you the same question to start, but start with Ellen. How did you know that you were going to do what you have done so well, and how did you know that being funny was going to be part of it?
I didn't.
Now, Jules?
Jules' turn.
Well,
No,
I think it's interesting.
No, Jules, I
Ellen's
really wasn't calling on you.
No, it's okay.
If Al knew he was going to be a comic, and I knew from the age of 5 what I was going to be, you're the only one here. You didn't know you were going to be a comic, did you?
I didn't know it, Jules.
And
Thank
look.
you. Now, Ellen, hi.
Yes.
How'd you know what you were going to do?
I didn't. I mean, when Roger was previously a member of the Harvard Faculty Club, so he does tend to think that people have life plans, I'm afraid. But when I was an undergraduate, I was a history major, and when I was in college, particularly when I was at Radcliffe, the idea of what you would do when you finished Radcliffe in my generation was that you would finish, you would get married, you would type your husband's thesis papers, you would have 4 children, and while those children were sleeping, you would write the great American novel, but only during naps. That was the extent of the amount of time. So I left college, and I got a truly crummy job at Newsweek, at which point they used to hire overeducated young women in order to redline things and make sure that something couldn't get in the paper. You couldn't, as a woman, get anything into Newsweek. You could only keep something out. So this was all horrible training to have a creative life. But I was so desperate at Newsweek, I started to freelance just to have something to do. And then one thing led to another. But I was totally clueless when I left college, which I think has always been reassuring to anybody I've talked to, anybody I've ever mentored.
But it wasn't a long time.
We're in the same place.
It wasn't many years before you graduated and then started to work on the Globe, right?
I worked at Newsweek for 2 years. I worked at the Detroit Free Press in the City Room for 2 years. And then I came to the Globe.
And when did you start writing a column?
I started writing a column in about, when I was about 8 years out of school, I guess.
That's amazing.
So.
That's great. Al, how'd you know? You must have known as a kid.
I kind of knew, but we met when I was 19, because when I was 18, I didn't think I was going to be a comic. I went to, I didn't know you really could do that. When I was, neither of my parents went to college. My dad didn't graduate high school, so it was really driven into our heads that we should go to, get an education. So my brother, who's 5 years older than me, was the first in our family to go to college, went to MIT, and he graduated with a degree in physics and announced that he was going to be a photographer. And so I had a crisis my freshman year because I got into Harvard because I tested well in math and science. And so I thought, because I tested well in math and science, that I should be a scientist. And but I discovered that I was not interested in any of the sciences. And so I became very depressed. And I took a test, a psychological test, to see what career I'd be suited for. And the number one that they, on the test that came out, was camp counselor. And
This was a temporary job, however.
yeah, and the very bottom was scientist. And this is like 300 careers. And number 2 was jazz musician, and I don't play an instrument. So, by the way, I noticed looking at the monitor that it's what David, Moses, and Isaiah are on the proscenium arch there, which were, I don't know how many, those are the names of the Marx Brothers. And I think
that is true.
Groucho was Moses, Moishe, right. And people, I mean, I thought I should point that out because we're talking about.
No, it's very helpful. Humor. Thank you.
I thought Groucho was Julius.
Groucho was Julius.
He was,
which is my name.
Oh,
there we go.
What a segue.
What a segue.
What a segue. Well,
it would have been a great segue if Roger had said it.
Thank you. Jules, how'd you know what you were going to do? And more than that, since your art is visual and we can see it, after you tell us that, show us.
All right. I drew from the time I was a kid, which was in the Bronx in the 1930s, and very few of you will remember this. There was a depression going on. And I kind of drew all of the time, although not funny. I like to draw heroes of cowboy movies or adventure strips, which were very, like Flash Gordon, Terry and the Pirates, those things. And as often happens with humor, or pointed humor, I mean, I didn't feel the need to be funny. I always knew I was going to be a cartoonist, but I thought I'd do an adventure strip. I didn't feel the need to be funny until I got drafted in the Army during the Korean War. Wanted to overthrow the government, and this was my way of doing it. So, I mean, that humor really became something I wanted to do only when I got angry enough. And there you are.
So show us.
Can we have these slides? The difference in what I do and the generally written comment is that cartoons are words and pictures, and that's what always fascinated me from the time I was a kid to this very moment. So, in addition to looking at this, and here, and I'll read it off to you, this couldn't work possibly without the body language. I can't go to Jimmy's house because it's Jimmy's turn to come to my house. Because I went to Jimmy's house last time. But I like to go to Jimmy's house. And Jimmy doesn't like to come to my house. But if he won't come to my house, I can't go to his house. Because fair is fair. So I won't ever see Jimmy. Boy, is 7 hard. But I mean, that's the word to the picture. Because of Roger and the Harvey connection here, I put this one in. This gentleman a middle-aged man sitting in a chair, and he says, in college, I always expected one day to get down to reading Kafka, Joyce, Proust, and Henry James, and now that I'm 50 and I haven't, frankly, I'm ashamed. So I asked my kids who are now in college if they are reading Kafka, Joyce, Proust, and Henry James, and they answered, who? There's a lot wrong with my generation, but at least we were educated to know what to be ashamed of. And I'll do one last one. This allows me to, here we are. I'll make this the last one. At 16, I was stupid, confused, insecure, and indecisive. At 25, I was self-confident, prepossessing, and assertive. At 45, I am stupid, confused, insecure, and indecisive. Who would have guessed that maturity is only a short break in adolescence?
Staying with you for a second, has humor changed a lot in your lifetime?
You know, I don't know. Yes, well, it's dumbed down, of course. I mean, when I started, which was when I started doing this kind of thing, it was back in the 50s. 56 was the first cartoon in the Village Voice. And within a few months of doing this, or maybe a year of doing this, I suddenly became aware, coming home and watching Omnibus one day, of Mike Nichols and Elaine May, who were doing this extraordinary work. And a little while before that, I became aware of Mort Saul out in San Francisco. So all of us working out of, I think, the same kind of frustration that nobody was representing us, Bob Hope was still representing us. I mean, that there was no one of our own generation, the post-Korean War educated quasi-elite who didn't feel very elite, and nobody was talking about sex, nobody was talking about politics, it was Eisenhower and McCarthy and everything was suppressed. And suddenly this humor started appearing, but not in magazines, but or in newspapers. It appeared in comic strips and in underground nightclubs. And there was a sense of, in Chicago, Second City began at that very moment. And there was a sense of great excitement because something was happening that was a comment on the society that all of us felt stifled by, were very much in disagreement with, and felt very much alone together.
Is that gone, Ellen, because there's nothing to oppose?
Oh, there's plenty to oppose. There's always something to oppose. I also think one of the other things that has changed, certainly in my lifetime, is that women didn't do stand-up comedy. Women weren't comedians. I'm certainly not a stand-up comedian. I'm the straight woman in the panel to a large extent. But also, you didn't make fun of men. I mean, not the men who put on their ties and went to work in the morning. That was like serious. And maybe women made fun of their husbands behind their back, but they didn't, that kind of making fun you can now do in public. It's allowed, but at that time it really was a no-no.
My wife has learned that you can do that.
Yeah, right. But when we were kids, it was like a scary thing to do. And now I think about my daughter's generation too, and she runs a women's improv troupe. Well, that kind of thing never would have happened.
Who were the people who made you laugh when you were a kid?
My dad.
Why?
My dad. Well, I'm a sucker for sight jokes. And my dad was good at it. He was also in politics, and he routinely went for the joke and lost the vote. So, was
he Adlai Stevenson?
Yeah, right. No, but he could have passed for Adlai Stevenson. He had the same level of success in the end. But he made me, and I must say, my husband's the only person I know who can make me laugh hysterically at 4 o'clock in the morning when everything has gone wrong. So.
That's a very nice comment.
Yeah, excellent characteristic.
Al, you're young, of course, but changes in humor in your life. You must have seen a lot of Saturday Night Live.
I was struck when Jules was talking about sort of the parallel of what you're talking about in Saturday Night Live, because when we came on TV, and we're a generation who grew up on television, but that medium was represented by the Carol Burnett Show. The only two variety shows on at the time were the Carol Burnett Show, which was actually a very good show, and Sonny and Cher, which was a horrible show. When Sonny Bono died tragically, there was a lot of eulogies for him, and there was some attempt to suggest that Sonny and Cher was a good show. It was a terrible show. And he should be ashamed. So in a way, what happened with us, and a lot of these people came out of Second City, Belushi and Aykroyd and Bill Murray, but it was sort of a breakthrough of a generation that had grown up on television, being on television. So, and I feel that we're losing some of that when I watch the show now. I mean, it's very different.
How is it different?
Well, we had people on our show actually cared and thought about politics.
That's right.
And now they don't. I mean, they just don't. And they do stuff on politics, but it's not from the perspective of someone who watches C-SPAN. Obviously in '75 I wasn't watching C-SPAN, but now I do. And it's just, politics is not important to these people.
Or it's changed. Political humor has changed. I mean, I think there was a generation when making jokes about politics or doing improv about politics had to do with the content of politics. And now there's a relationship between the comedian and the audience if the audience only knows about, sex jokes about the president if Monica Lewinsky is the sum total of shared knowledge about then the humor
It's
is
dumbed
about
down.
that.
It's dumbed down. I mean, when Second City started, and there's a story in the current New Yorker on Mike Nichols, and they go into all of the University of Chicago days and how much of the humor came from that. Well, all the references were quite erudite. And when Saturday Night Live went on, whether it's politics or anything else, you knew these guys, and Gilda were talking about something that was not simply showbiz self-referential, although there was that too, but it was a lot of other stuff going on. And it was very observant and very perceptive and exciting because you saw these talents explode.
There's a sort of a parallel between the game shows now and the game shows in the 50s in terms of the level of the questions. I mean, the idea of Charles Van Doren being asked a multiple choice question on, Charles Van Doren was fed that the sun is 93 million miles away from the Earth. I mean, it's just crazy how dumbed down society is becoming.
Well, think about, so you want to marry a multimillionaire? There was only one question. I do. Yes.
Did you like that
you know what?
Oh yeah, I loved it. I only regret I wasn't on it.
I'm sure.
They have a new one. Who wants to give Maury Povich a blowjob? Which, I thought that Who Wants to Marry a Millionaire had hit a new low, but right away.
That's a terrible show.
How do they choose the contestants? What's the selection?
Well, fortunately, 4 of the contestants are the Village people. For Maury.
Talking about political humor, what are the three of you? What do the three of you think of the election so far, and where is it funny?
The push polls are funny.
Push polls.
People know what the push polls are. Push polls are when the Bush campaign, it seems, is calling people in South Carolina and saying, we're an independent polling group, we're taking a survey, and we'd like to know if you knew this negative thing about John McCain, would it make you less likely or more likely to vote for him? So I actually called the McCain people. I want them to do some push polling, and they won't do it. But here was my question for them. They said, hi, we're an independent polling company. We're doing a survey. If you knew that while John McCain was hanging from his thumbs for 5.5 years in the Hanoi Hilton, that George W. Bush snorted 4 pounds of cocaine, would that make you more likely or less likely to vote for George W. Bush? I think I love how dirty it's getting.
You like this?
Oh, yeah.
Well, just from, that it's them that are getting dirty is, I take a lot of great satisfaction from that.
I don't know what's funnier. I mean, to me, I was just spending a little time today with some, sort of your basic West Side liberal New York
Hold on.
people who have a mad crush on John McCain. Now, you got to figure this out. These are the kind of people who would fight for the title to out-liberal each other. These are people who didn't vote for Ruth Messinger because she wasn't pure enough, And now they're all hot for John McCain. Now go figure this. They're pro-choice. They're anti-capital punishment. They're but then they say, but John McCain, as our cartoonist said, but John McCain, he's authentic.
It's the Vietnam guilt syndrome kicking in. It's
partially.
It didn't work with Bob Kerry.
favorite.
The Vietnam guilt syndrome didn't work with Bob Kerry, but I think I like McCain, and I guess I'm a liberal who likes McCain, but I know
Snap
him.
out of it.
Well, I know him. I'll tell you. Can I tell you a story about McCain that isn't funny? But
Sure, this is the ideal place for it.
but maybe people have heard it, but it bears telling. A friend of mine, David Ifshin, do you know this story? David Ifshin died a few years ago, and I met McCain at his funeral. He was a mutual friend. And Ifshin, during the Vietnam War, was an anti-war protester, and he went to Hanoi, not with Jane Fonda, but the same kind of deal, and spoke on Radio Hanoi denouncing the war, and the North Vietnamese piped in the denunciation into the Hanoi Hilton, so John McCain got to hear it while he was hanging from his thumbs. So in 1984, Ifshin had become more a mainstream liberal, like me, and was working for Walter Mondale. So McCain was a congressman from Arizona at the time, and he denounced Mondale for having this guy Ifshin. So Ifshin goes to Capitol Hill, finds McCain in his office, goes up to McCain and says, "I'm David Ifshin, and I owe you an apology." And McCain says, "No, I owe you an apology. You had every right to do what you did." Two of them became friends. They worked together to do, among other things, to normalize relations with Vietnam. This guy is a different kind of guy than most of the politicians that you see. And there is something about, there are different ways to come out of 5.5 years of captivity, and bitterness is one that we've seen a lot. And this guy is not bitter, and this guy is authentic. And I'm going to vote for Gore if it's McCain and Gore, because I'm a liberal and I'm a Democrat. But there's a reason that people like this guy, and there's reason that people who are traveling with him like him in the press.
What do you think of this election?
Well, can I read that cartoon I showed you?
Sure.
This came out of the debate the other night. I felt pretty much as Al does about McCain, but this gave me pause. I have this cartoon this very day got turned down by the New York Times, but nonetheless, it's 7 panels of a man looking straight at us, and he says, "Bush is smug and dim, and both country club and good old boy, and sponsors serial capital punishment. For these and so many other reasons, I don't like him. But he doesn't advocate unleashing CIA-style covert operations against hostile foreign powers. And John McCain, who I like, does. Yikes." That's my Jack Benny yikes. I've always wanted to do that.
Yikes.
Much better.
Yeah,
what worries me about McCain is this, there is this thing, for all of the reasons that people like him, I like him. And then there is this nutsy CIA thing of wanting to make things all right with rogue countries, so-called. And we've been through that. It was called the 1950s and 60s. And we see what happened. And I don't want it to happen again. I'm scared of having somebody in the White House unleash and start all of that stuff. And if McCain runs against Gore, he will win. And if Bush runs against Gore, Gore will win. So I'm for a bloody series of primaries in which Bush barely survives, runs against Gore, and loses. That's my strategic analysis of this.
The Village Voice had a...
You had to say that.
No, in the days in which you made it shine, had a long, distinguished run on politics. And could you talk about what you remember of those early years and how you grew in it, and how you saw audiences respond to the cartoons? And did you feel at the center of something that would change people's minds?
Oh, you always hoped that something was happening out there, and there was a period in the late 50s and early 60s when you felt the country was beginning to change through all sorts of things happening. Suddenly there was a critical sensibilities in the culture that hadn't been there before. As the Voice, because of the newspaper strike, became more widely accepted and more widely read, at that very moment the New York Review of Books got launched, and suddenly there was this kind of stuff in print and widely disseminated that simply hadn't been there before, and voices who one hadn't heard before, and and the air was full of just wonderful stuff. And it was a short period. I don't want to go too deeply, but that period of hope, when the left suddenly understood that, my God, it might actually achieve power, then the left became as silly as the very people that it was fighting against, and all sense of hope and real change went south, and we're trying to recollect ourselves ever since. And one watches with interest. I mean, in my age, in my dotage, I no longer get excited, or try not to get excited the way I once did, but at the same time, you have to feel that the problems that this country continues to face and have not been solved must be faced, and that eventually, perhaps with less nuttiness, we'll begin to deal with them. And if humor can be one of those ways of pointing it out, that's great. But the stuff isn't funny. The gap between rich and poor, the lack of interest in education, and the fact that there is no progressive force for change in the society at all any longer. I mean, we can have compassionate conservatives because we don't have any kind of compassion anywhere else really moving us forward.
What would make, this I ask all of you, you just listed 3 terribly serious levels of problems. What would make them available to humor? Or why aren't they available to humor now?
Well, I think Jules once said humor, he's motivated when he gets mad. I mean, you know, you see something, or absurdity, or you see something that is just so absurd that it demands that you point it out. I mean, not that anybody necessarily is demanding it, but something inside you says, my God, you can't let that one go by. That's just too much. You know, it's sort of like...
But absurdity would be, is often people behaving in some demonstrably foolish way that you can find a way to ridicule. If you're talking about the disparity between the rich and the poor, is there any way in that for humor, or is it just outside humor? Is it too serious, too dire?
It's hilarious. You know, I mean, the closest I come is, you know, when Forbes was suggesting the flat tax, I was saying that I was for it because my books have been so successful. And that I really feel that if the royalties on my books are taxed at 17 instead of 39.6%, it'll really help unleash my creative energy. I don't know. Is that helping anybody? Hey, you want to hear a Buddy Hackett joke?
Please.
Okay. Because I was just thinking about this because part of the reason I think I'm doing what I do is that my dad loved to laugh, and probably the best times I've had in my life were just watching television with my dad, and he loved Buddy Hackett. And my dad inhaled a pipe for 50 years. He died of lung cancer. That's not funny. Anyway, but when he would start to laugh, he would start coughing and then cough up phlegm. And my mom would have to leave.
Getting funnier and funnier.
Would have to leave up the room. But he loved Buddy Hackett, and Buddy Hackett was a phlegm producer always. And
where is this going?
It's a joke Buddy Hackett told. Okay. Guy goes into doctor. And he's got a dot in the middle of his forehead. And the doctor says, oh my God, you know, I've never seen this before, but I read about it when I was in medical school in the books. He said, well, what is it, doctor? He said, well, in about 6 months, you're going to have a penis growing out of your forehead. And the guy says, well, do something, cut it off. Can you cut it off? No, I can't cut it off. It's attached to your brain. You'd die. He said, so what you're telling me is that in 6 months, when I wake up, every morning when I wake up, I'm going to look in the mirror and see a penis growing out of my forehead. And the doctor says, oh, no. You won't see it. The balls will cover your eyes.
So there was this priest, this minister, and this rabbi.
I just thought it was time
Quickly.
for that joke.
Thank you.
Now, wait. Tell me again, what was the show, the television show that Buddy Hackett told us?
He told this to me on a plane. Yeah, this was not on. Want to hear another one?
Please. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
But make this one dirty.
This is also, okay. You'll like this one. So Little Red Riding Hood's going through the forest. This Buddy told me this. This is a typical Buddy joke. Little Red Riding Hood's walking through the forest. She sees a wolf hiding behind some bushes, and she goes up to him and she goes, "My, what big ears you have," and he runs away. She goes down the path again. About 5 minutes later, she sees the wolf again hiding behind some bushes. She goes up to him and says, "My, what big eyes you have," and he runs away. 5 minutes later, she's down the path. She sees the wolf again hiding behind some bushes. Goes up and says, "My, what big teeth you have." And he says, "Would you leave me alone, lady? I'm trying to take a shit here." See, these are classic old Buddy Hackett jokes. Today, everything's been dumbed down.
Yeah. Who's your favorite comic? And don't tell me Hackett.
Oh. My favorite, well, they go through time. Richard Pryor was a favorite comic. I loved Hackett. I thought he was terribly funny. Nichols and May I mentioned. And Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, you. I mean, my God, the stuff, the Stuart Smalley stuff and others.
Gee, you're my Benny. How about Bob and Ray? Huh?
Bob and Ray were wonderful.
Unbelievable.
Do you remember any of Bob and Ray stuff?
Oh, yeah, I have it all on tape. Komodo Dragon. I mean, it's just, they didn't do
well, in dealing with and radio,
shit jokes. They didn't do that. So you wouldn't be interested.
But radio humor, which was the humor of my childhood and growing up, was very, very different. And I mean, there was Bob and Ray, but before Bob and Ray, there was Henry Morgan, there was Fred Allen. It was interesting. Somebody commented the other day that Jack Benny on television did virtually the same kind of shows he did on radio, and it wasn't nearly as funny. That the radio show, where you had to kind of invent in your imagination what was going on, the same jokes was hilarious. And when it was on TV, it was okay, it was charming, but it wasn't enough, I think, to have made Jack Benny this legendary comic that he became.
And the repeated gag was funnier on radio because
Yes.
there was nothing to look at to distract you.
Well, going down to his basement and to the vault and hearing all of those sounds and the Maxwell, of course, all of that, and the classic one of your money and your life, and there's a long way. Now on television, that's not going to be nearly as funny.
Tell the money or your life, Joe.
It's well, everybody here knows.
Tell it.
No, you're much better.
No,
at that.
no. Tell
All right, Al.
Tell it. No, Al sticks with the dirty
All right.
stuff.
Benny is accosted on the street by a burglar who says, "Your money or your life." And then there's nothing on the air for about 20 seconds. And he says, "Well," and Benny says, "I'm thinking."
Thank you. Who are your favorite comedians, besides your dad?
Besides my dad. Well, I guess I was listening, just to refer back to Elaine May and Mike Nichols. I got a tape of theirs last summer. Now, I would have figured all of that stuff was dated. But I was listening to it on tape, and the timing and the humor, there's that wonderful bit that they do when, at the time they wrote it, it was when all the spaceships were going up and not going up, basically, going up, and they'd be going down.
Mother.
The Mother one, and where Elaine May calls him on the phone, and he's a, I can't do the whole thing, I don't think, but he's a scientist. He's a scientist who's been in charge of these rockets that are crashing, and she says things like, "I hear you lost another one." and he says, well, Mom, it wasn't exactly me. It wasn't exactly. Are they taking it out of your pay? And then he goes on about how, and she says, well, you didn't call me. He says, well, I was a little busy. We had this rocket. It had to go up. She says, so I sat here all day. I sat here. I said, my son's going to call me. I know my son. He's going to call me. You know? And it goes on and on and on until she's reduced him to complete
Baby talk.
babbling baby
Yeah.
talk. But I thought, my God, that has held up. It's probably 30-odd years old. The timing, the
the early
humor,
60s.
more of it was
And it's
incredible.
Still, I've got much of this stuff on tape, and I teach a humor class. And the first time I played it was when I was doing the class out at Northwestern. And I played one of the pieces called Bach to Bach, that was on their first album. And it's a couple in bed just having a young people's conversation. And these 20-year-olds in class listening to this stuff was sitting there just looking amazed. And they said, I mean, all went through saying, my God, I can't believe this. I had this conversation last week. I mean, they were just the kind of stuff you heard back then in the 60s, they were saying now that nothing or very little had changed. And that's, the kind of humor that sticks. This is that kind of humor. When you're dealing with basic emotions, or basic relationships between men and women, or parents and children, those things are constant and are always there.
Some of the other stuff that I think got much dated, but I never liked it to begin with, so maybe it's not. It was this sort of Jerry Lewis stuff. I was never a fan of that, and it doesn't hold up for me.
Well, there's great people working now. Steve Martin is
Extraordinary.
is a genius, and there was someone who changed stand-up. Because he just, at his time, Pryor was the giant before Steve, and Pryor was a brilliant social commentator, and Steve just did Dada, basically, and and.
Do you remember the piece he did on Christmas on Saturday Night Live? Mm-hmm. Wishing, well, can you?
I don't remember it, and actually Robert Smigel wrote that.
It was absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
And they repeat it, I guess, pretty often. But
They repeat. I get a lot of checks for 8 cents.
And I was thinking the other day, after Charles Schultz's death, that he did a lot of the comedy about nothing long before Seinfeld.
Well, Nothing and Insecurity, which was also very much of the Seinfeld stuff.
Booth Tarkington, the Penrod series, hilarious. I love these people came here to hear us recite who was funny.
Lewis and Clark were funny.
Clark.
Jerry Lewis and Dick Clark. Isn't it? You're talking about things that are funny that always seem to have a serious base. What's the difference, first of all, between humor and comedy, and does humor always have to have something serious undergirding it? And now I'm going to play a little song.
I don't think, this is what's always troubling about these things, because it's very hard to define it. I mean, my humor is a specific kind of humor, and I can talk about it endlessly and have. But
Please
it's not,
do.
But it's not like someone else. It's not like Roger's humor. Thank God. As a matter of fact, I would like to read to you. May I? The Dog by Roger Rosenblatt. The Dog Barks by Roger Rosenblatt. The Dog Barks by Roger Rosenblatt, who is trying to read Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. He is trying to read Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, but the dog barks. As Raskolnikov dodges his landlady, the dog barks. As Raskolnikov curses his sister's fate, the dog barks too. The Dog Always Barks by Roger Raskolnikov. Dogs in Punishment by Roger Rosenblatt. By Roger Raskolnikov. By Fyodor Dostoevsky. Bark, 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 bark. This is a piece called Dostoevsky, written by our host here.
Thank you so much for bringing it, too.
Now, that
was humor.
Yes.
And not comedy.
Not comedy.
Yes.
So
The audience has written questions. One is, Ellen started to talk about, maybe you all would. Would you comment on the Peanuts comic strip and Charles Schulz in American humor?
Well, Peanuts, Schultz did something extraordinary. For one thing, you have to be a cartoonist to understand how impossible a job this is for the people who do what he did, which is turn out 6 dailies and a Sunday page, day in and day out, year in and year out, for close to 50 years. And it's assumed that they all have to be good. And these guys, most of them, don't take breaks. I think Gary Trudeau was the first one who simply took 9 months off at several times. But before then, no one ever did it. And it's an impossible schedule. And what Schultz introduced, comic strips were always full of kids strips, but they were always the pesky kids done from a grown-up point of view. Kind of looking, Dennis the Menace kind of thing, looking down, the grown-ups looking at this nervy little kid, and aren't they adorable, and aren't they funny? But never before had a strip been written from the point of view of the kid or from the point of view of a man who remained a kid and felt all of the insecurities that he put into the strip of the kid. And Schultz created this rep company, also unheard of in comics at the time, of these different characters with quite a few of them with different identities, some better than others, and I agree with those who feel that the strip went south when Snoopy took over and began to dominate it. But until then, it was a remarkable panoply of emotions and real feelings done as high comedy and great charm and sweetness. He had all of that. So you fell in love with these characters, and they told you something about yourself at the same time. And the only rival he had, took him many years to get it, was Waterston, who did Calvin and Hobbes. It was another extraordinary strip.
I was a huge fan when I was a kid, and then I just don't get the New York Times has a policy against comic strips. So I hadn't seen a lot of it, but I was a huge. He was a Minnesotan. I'm from Minnesota, yeah. And I saw a Charlie Rose interview with him the other day, and he had a certain sweetness to him that's very Midwestern.
And yeah,
the routine of his life. The old Woody Allen line, 80% of life is showing up. For Schultz, it was 97%. He had the same day. Getting up in the morning, going to what was the ice rink called? It was called something like the Peanuts ice rink or something, and then going to one Snoopy Plaza where he worked,
every
and then
day.
Back to the ice rink for lunch, and then back to work.
He never traveled. He never went any. I've often thought, my God, if I had been a successful cartoonist and made $27 million a year, I'd know how to spend it. And it wouldn't be in Santa Rosa.
and isn't it amazing that he died the day his last strip appeared, and that he did every one of them, and the decision had been made that he would be doing every one of them. So I think
it was the contract. I think that's the way they.
No, but I meant that it won't live on. It won't live on.
But these syndicates are tough. He had to die.
Oh, on the day.
Don't fool around with the syndicate.
We go from this, from Peanuts to this. Is there humor in Hillary versus Giuliani?
No. No humor.
Not yet. Stay posted.
I haven't found anything yet, and it seems so ripe, and yet I don't know. I'm sort of bound up.
Oh, I think it's hilarious. I love it. I think it's. I think 2 less qualified people for the U.S. Senate I can't find, and except for the 98 others, And since I have nothing bound up emotionally in this except rage, I intend to have a lot of fun with it. But I'd be worried about. I'm going to vote for Hillary, but any candidate who has a campaign run by Haralickis, I worry about.
Ellen, what do you think of this election?
Is Alan Keyes from New York?
No, Maryland.
Oh, okay. I thought he might just show up. He's become the sort of Zelig of this campaign. Seems to be sure. I was thinking about that the other night in the when Larry King had Bush and McCain on together,
and Keys in the middle.
And this thing went out over CNN across the entire world, and now huge millions of people across the entire world think that Alan Keyes is one of the three pivotal political figures in American life.
Larry King.
Larry King, what did I say?
Alan King.
Alan, well.
Yeah, Alan King is a serious man. He knows something. I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be quite interesting and quite funny. I mean, it's funny, that Giuliani brings out all of these mixed emotions, because there's no question the city is running better, but at some cost, and he's this dictator. and I kind of like the idea of him getting elected to the Senate and putting it under house arrest. I can't. If Hillary got elected, the jokes about her in the Senate would be about her. If Rudy gets elected, the jokes will be about the Senate and how he tears apart the Republican Party. I mean, that's not bad. That's not bad happening.
This is to Al. Other than the fact that you answered this before, but other than the fact that you are no longer a regular, I just thought you'd like the question. Mm-hmm. Why do you think Saturday Night Live is no longer funny?
Well, I didn't say it was no longer funny. I think they do a lot of funny stuff, and I root for the show every week. I have a lot of friends over there, and I think a lot of the cast are very talented. I was just talking really about the political humor, which I think they'd agree is not really up to what we did.
Could you talk a bit about what it was like at the beginning when you joined it?
Well, when I joined the show was at the beginning it was in '75. I arrived there and I looked around, and it was the first day of work. Everyone, Mike O'Donoghue shows up, Chevy shows up, Herb Sargent, Ann Beats. And I looked around, and I started with Rosie and Lauren, obviously. And I look around and I say, well, this is a different group of people. This is a group that hasn't been on TV before, hasn't written for TV before. And not only that, but they hired me. So they must be brilliant. So I assumed it was going to be a huge hit. It was youthful arrogance. It was complete. I was just a total jerk. And so it was incredibly exciting. Boom, boom, boom. We, Aykroyd, Gilda, Belushi are the first three hired of the cast, and it was just, incredibly exciting and fun, and everything that Bob Woodward said it was.
How? When you see really amazingly talented people like that, how do you write for them? Do you watch what they can do and then write according to that, or do you write what you say and then just hope that they?
Well, you do every combination of that. Sometimes the nicest part about having someone like Aykroyd or Belushi or Gilda is that sometimes you can get away with writing dreck. and they'll elevate it so you still keep your job. But yeah, most of what I would write would be sort of conceptual ideas as opposed to writing for characters. So generally I'd write something and cast it from our people there. And one of the advantages that group had was that there were only 7 cast members. Huh. And so people had to play different things. So Aykroyd would play the dad, because even though he was 24 years old, right. And so it made this cast stretch. And right now, somehow the show has gotten into having maybe 15 on-air people, and so people are get very specialized, and the audience doesn't know them as well. That's one way I think the show's going to
That seems like an awfully dumb idea. Why have they done that? Because you can't really have favorites if there are 15 people, or it's very, very difficult to do it. And why have they gone that
I don't know. It's I think it's sort of like you go like well, he's funny, and he could add this thing. And so you start to get, starts to look like the Democratic Party. You get, there's labor, and there's gays, and there's, so you get the guy who can do impressions, and you get, so it's sort of like coalition building as opposed to having a cast that just is allowed to stretch.
Can you remember a particularly funny thing that you wrote at the beginning there that we'd remember too?
Oh, well, I'm
Brimming over.
Julia Child bleeding to death.
Oh, well.
I saw Julia Child on the Today Show cut herself. And I thought, and it was woo, and it was just, I thought it was like Thanksgiving weekend, and it was so the next week I wrote, Aykroyd as Julia Child, cutting herself in the kitchen and bleeding to death, and Danny was hilarious, and one of the great things he did, and this is what a great live performer, a great performer does, is. If that show's repeated a lot, you've probably seen it. The way he controls the blood spurting is masterful because you can always get a laugh with blood spurting. And so he just knew exactly by what the text was when to use the blood spurting. And it was something I'm very, very proud of.
I think, too, I'd be curious, do you know when something you've done is funny until you watch someone read it or watch someone see it?
That's very good.
I mean, I've often thought that, I don't know, maybe 1 out of 8 columns that I do is humor, but it's the most insecure. I'm never sure it's funny until somebody else laughed. I think it's hard to know. It's hard to judge your own as opposed to judging something that's appointed, and you've made
Well, I've found in plays that there are always surprises. I mean, things that you didn't think were going to be laughs are laughs. But generally, I think I pretty much knew. I mean, some things were got bigger responses than I thought they would. Other things got smaller responses than to this day I think they deserved. And that was general. I mean, it's interesting in the theater that it's as if it's the same audience that keeps coming back because they have the same response night after night in the play. That if within the first 30 seconds you get this big laugh, you get the same laugh night after night after night. And if you don't get it one night, you're going to have a lousy show, whatever the rest of the show is like. Mm-hmm. And that's the way it works, as if the audience has learned from the previous night's audience. It's very, very peculiar, and I've never quite figured it out. But I think having done it all this, I mean, in terms of the strip, I understand how a strip works, and I understand the build, and I understand the storytelling technique. So I know by the time I finish writing one, I may not know that day, but if I can put it away overnight and take a look at it the next day, I will have a pretty good idea whether it works or not. But I've never been able to do a gag panel. If I thought of a gag idea and put it down, I don't know if it's any good.
What's a gag?
Like a New Yorker cartoon. Like a New Yorker, like the New Yorker single panel cartoon is something that I admire, particularly in the hands of the people who are brilliant at it. I admire enormously, and I have no sense of it, of how you tell that kind of joke, of how you know whether you're funny or not. And I've tried doing it over the years. Or the single political cartoon, the single panel political cartoon that Pat Oliphant's a master of, and Paul Conrad, and we've had great tradition of many others, Herb Block. I've never been able to do that. I just don't think that way.
You think in terms of story?
I think in terms of like the comic strips that influenced me from the beginning. It has to be a succession of panels, a strip for me to know what I'm doing and to have a sense of it working or not working.
I tend to, as soon as I write something I think is funny, tell someone. And it's partly a test and also I just want to tell someone I wrote something funny. And usually it's my wife, because I'm working at home now, and she really hates this. But I mean, what's funny is is the big question. Well, usually she laughs because she has to. I mean, this is the whole question. What's funny? I mean, and so if you're writing on a staff show and you're rewriting something, you're arguing. You're arguing over what's funny. And then, you're thinking this is what's going to get the laugh in the sketch, and it doesn't. And there are people who write a sketch every week and get it cut. It doesn't get put up to get blocked even, and they go, it'll fucking kill. And you go like, no, it won't. And so, I mean, that's the whole ball game, really.
Al, in addition to having your stuff helped by some of the people you mentioned, you must have also seen stuff killed by.
Oh yeah. That's real. And everyone. The first Stuart Smalley I wrote for a cast member, and it was so. And it wasn't fair to the cast member in a way because it was so in my head what the character was. But it
did it go on the air that way?
No. It died a terrible death in read-through, and but someone on one of the Robert Smigel actually said you should do it, and I did it, and but no, I mean it is. There have been incarnations of the show where there have been more talented casts than other casts, and there have been times where the writers get very frustrated because in the writer's room it's funny, and you're seeing a writer do it, and you're falling on the floor, and then it gets in the hands of some asshole cast member, and they totally
fuck it up. But the fit between actor and work, I mean, Bill Murray's Lounge Singer worked the second you saw it. I mean, you knew you were in good hands, and it couldn't possibly go wrong no matter what he did. And the same thing with the Greek diner with Belushi, hamburger, cheeseburger.
Cheeseburger.
I mean, it didn't really matter what it was. I mean, the things were very funny, but it didn't have to be because those guys were just
the
funny.
initial conceit, which was Don Novello's, was that piece, and then Belushi was that guy, and it was hilarious.
Was that funny because you had seen that guy before, but it never really registered until Belushi took it one stage higher?
I don't know. I mean, it was so Belushi. He was Albanian, but it was a Greek diner guy, and it was just it was really funny. And remember Billy's character in that? He was the guy who just spoke no English, but whenever you talked to him, went. And it was always like, "Can I get a little mustard on it?" And with a tomato, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful piece. Well, we had every once in a while on the show, somebody would we had there was no Coke, Pepsi. And the Coke people were really angry at us. And I remember once...
Why? Because you'd run out of Coke?
No, because it was Pepsi instead of Coke. And then I remember once Lauren had invited the head of Newsweek to the show. And Novello, who actually wrote the cheeseburger sketch, had written a thing called Next Week in Review, and it was psychics talking about what was... And...
Good stuff.
And the last segment in Next Week in Review was always what the cover of Time magazine was going to be. And so this week it was Send More Chuck Berry. And it was because they had NASA had sent out one of these space probes and included sort of a lot of parts of our culture, including a Chuck Berry record. So this was the message from
space.
This is the message from space. Send more Chuck Berry. So So we go to the party afterwards, and the head of Newsweek goes up to Lauren and goes, "Thanks a lot." Lauren goes, "What? What? You had to make it the cover of Time." And so we would get stuff like that all the time. I don't know, I thought that was hilarious that the head of Newsweek would get so pissed off at that.
I like that story.
Yeah, they don't. Well, we had fun getting there, didn't we?
I love it. Someone asked of the three of you, can you recall a moment where your sense of humor and of what is funny carried you through something difficult or painful?
No.
Okay. Now,
Yes.
Yes.
thank you. Well, we had two yeses
2 to 1.
and a no. Who was the greatest humorist of your generation?
I think
No, please. Thank you. And I'm not of your generation. Thanks.
I go blank with the name game. The Barbara Walters question. I just can't respond.
If you want to make fun of
you
the
know-
audience, that's up to you. It really comes from them, this question.
Speaking of blank, Mel Blanc.
Mel Blanc.
Mel Blanc.
Yes.
Was amazing. One of the great, the Soviets, if they had a guy like Mel Blanc,
Well, all
we
all
would
the
have been in
Mels.
trouble.
Mel Brooks
Right. Mel Allen.
and Mel I.
What other television shows did you like besides the one that you mentioned? Did you ever see the Show of Shows, or was that long before you?
That was before my time.
That was the
I've seen
first stuff I ever saw on television.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's wildly funny.
I was thinking
Milton
of
Berle's doing accents.
I was thinking of the Show of Shows when you talked earlier at the beginning about men not being made fun of, or suburban men not being fun, because Caesar played a suburban husband who was always playing the fool in that relationship, whether it was with Nanette Fabre as the wife or Imogene Coca. They were the more sensible ones. And I mean, just the reverse of Ricky and what was her name? Lucy.
Yeah.
Stan Freberg sort of brought the
He was wonderful.
guy in the gray
Wonderful.
flannel
Yeah.
suit to as the object of ridicule.
I wonder if the audience saw or the panel too, the writers on the Show of Shows on PBS.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that great?
Wonderful.
And what was interesting, and I don't know if you found it interesting too, that all these guys now were just world famous, and they weren't when they were writing. Neil Simon,
Larry
Gilbart,
Woody Allen.
Mel Brooks,
Carl Reiner.
Carl Reiner writing and performing in these things, and yet they still had this deference for Sid Caesar and you could see why. There was. I mean, he stayed silent most of the time, but when he chose to talk or recall a bit, which he could seemingly do, or recall a riff perfectly, and then he and Reiner would fall into this thing. You really remembered how funny television could be, and the natural
And that was
successor.
also interactive. I mean, I think there's what Jules does is storytelling to us is individual. And that's one kind of humor, but the kind of humor that they did is just this interactive, that they riffed off of each other and created, well, that was what you
Sid Caesar's autobiography, which he wrote after this period of, I guess he had some drug problems and stuff like that. The name of his autobiography was Where Was I? And it was sort of like, it was exactly what you wanted to know. Where the hell has he been?
Well, but you couldn't have had Saturday Night Live without Caesar.
No.
I mean, I think the sensibility that created Saturday Night came out of the combination of things like Caesar and Mad Magazine and and just the zeitgeist, but that fed into it.
The interesting thing about it was that it was as funny as it was, as sharp as it was, a satire. It was harmless. It was basically gentle. There was nothing that was, you could crack the egg, but you didn't break it. And at the end, you didn't feel it as if you had been in a mud fight at all. You felt as if you were just laughing at something that was worth laughing at without much being destroyed. That seemed to me a very hard thing to do.
Well, they were doing things that nobody had really done before, and now it's become such a cliche that we don't remember. I mean, the first parody of movies, popular movies of the time, were done on the Caesar show. I still remember Streetcar Named Desire, with Caesar playing Stanley, and by the end of it, he's got his T-shirt is in shreds and all over, and he sprayed beer all over and people are sliding all over the floor in this it's just a garbage pit that he's created. You want me to clean the table? I'll clean the table. Just all over the place. And if you see that stuff now and it exists on tape, it's hilarious. They did This Is Your Life. I mean, this is the kind of parodies that have been done endlessly, and it's still funny. Howie Morris, who was just brilliant, clutching Caesar around the leg, and these guys were just wonderful. And as you said, with Aykroyd controlling the spirit of blood, that I forget who told this story, but I think maybe on that writer's show, that Caesar was playing an actor in the dressing room with an opera singer, and he's putting on his makeup, and this is an important part of the thing, and the pencil breaks, and he can't do much with it. He can't. So he puts down. Nobody knows what he's going to do, so he puts down one line, then another, and then two crosses. And then he starts playing tic-tac-toe on his forehead. And there's a total ad-lib moment out of a moment of crisis. And these guys come up with it. It's really quite thrilling when it happens. But it's amazing how often they are able to do it.
Yeah, rule breaking in that
Yes.
sense of real freedom.
And going for broke.
Yeah.
Going for broke.
Caesar is still funny.
Yeah.
I was at an event where I was giving a talk, and then I could introduce him, and that's worth a life. And he came up, and he didn't say anything in English. He went in. Do you remember the routines?
Oh yeah.
He would go the Italian and the
incredible.
French and the German
yeah.
things. He'd go from one to another, and of course, in the middle of French, you'd hear the French thing. You'd hear Pasteur suddenly, and then having nothing. But it was still. I mean, he's frail, and he's got to be 80, right? But he is still wonderfully funny and shines in front of an audience.
A friend of mine was in a pilot that they made where he played sort of the owner of a Greek coffee shop, and was in the pilot with him. Said he was hilarious. And I think it was with ABC, and ABC decided to fire him because they didn't think he was funny.
No, absolutely.
That's funny.
And it's
Great.
Well, they're not where they are by accident.
Tonight and a long time before, the three of you have given us and Minions a lot of pleasure. I will ask as a final question of the three of you, talk about a moment in your life or several when you knew that what you were doing is what was worth a life, what you wanted to do. Ellen?
Oh God! sounds like journalism class where you're supposed to write your own obituary.
Ellen, I always find it a very bad idea to make fun of the host.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go last.
You will go last, too. I'll rephrase the question. Al, how are you?
there were moments in when live TV has this rush. So there were a number of moments doing Saturday Night Live where you're just And remember once we did this Republican debate in '88, and Aykroyd was Dole, and Dana was Bush for the first time. And this was a New Hampshire debate, and at the time remember Dole actually later said, "Stop lying about my record." Remember that? Yeah. And I remember it was just, Danny was hilarious as Dole, and I had written this with some other guys, and I was playing Robertson on the thing, Pat Robertson. And it just was one of these things that worked on, and there was a line where Danny goes, "George Bush, I can't remember what the thing was, but the last part of the joke was, or I'll stick this pencil in your neck. And I just said, I'm glad I'm alive.
Ellen, are you ready yet?
Got great moment of pleasure when you're working at the computer.
You've done something that is so difficult to do,
Yeah.
a highly successful column for
highly successful.
30 years,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, right. It's that wonderful moment when you push the send button.
Jules?
Well, it's
I'm over here, Jules.
yeah. Let's get sentimental. I've been doing this thing for a very, very long time, and I still remember the first time I saw my first cartoon in print, and what a thrill and what a rush it was. And I still love doing this stuff, and it's still, and when I finish something, particular piece that is in color, say for the New Yorker, or an illustration for one of the kids' books, and it just works.
Yeah.
And I am just exactly as I was when I was 7 or 8 years. That I ended up doing what I planned to do when I was 7. That's that ain't a bad life. and so it continually fills me with pleasure.
On behalf of us all, thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Al.
Thank you, Roger.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.